Welcome back to the deep dive. We've got some really thought-provoking material today, basically arguing humanity's hit a kind of crossroads.
That's right. The idea presented is that our current global value systems might be, well, failing us.
Okay, so these sources look at both Western and Eastern ways of thinking.
Exactly. They analyze them and suggest maybe they've run their course. So our mission here is to really understand this argument for new global leadership and, crucially, where the sources think it might come from.
All right, let's dive in. So the West. The material suggests it's kind of struggling, lacking compelling values, democratic systems under pressure.
Yeah, and interestingly, it even points out how the West has borrowed economic ideas like socialism from the East.
So it's not just about economics then.
No, the argument seems to be deeper, like a lack of unifying values, a sort of ideological tiredness.
And the East doesn't get off lightly either,
Yeah.
right? Marxism and similar collective ideas.
Right. The sources argue their appeal has faded. It's become more about state power, less about the original principles.
And there was that specific example about Russia.
Yeah, the agricultural decline under the collective system, needing imports despite historically being an exporter. It suggests a potential clash with maybe human nature itself.
So pulling that thread, the argument is that Western leadership isn't ending because it's materially weak.
Precisely. But because of this, let's call it a vacuum of guiding values.
Okay, so what's needed then, according to these sources?
Well, a leadership that can, on the one hand, preserve material progress and European ingenuity is acknowledged there, but also introduce totally new values, a practical, original approach.
And this is where Islam comes into the picture, correct?
Yes. The sources single out Islam, arguing it alone has the necessary values and methodology.
Even considering things like the scientific revolution or nationalism.
Yeah, the texts acknowledge those, but basically say they've had their day, they've run their course.
How is Islam's approach presented differently?
Well, it's not seen as anti-progress. Actually, the sources highlight the idea of being a steward on earth from the Quran as a primary human role. Material development can even be worship under certain conditions.
And the community aspect is key. The Ummah.
Absolutely central. The sources point to Quranic verses about this community being balanced, witnesses to humanity, promoting good, forbidding evil.
But there's a catch, isn't there?
A big one. These principles need a living community, an ummah, to actually demonstrate them effectively.
And the argument is that this specific kind of community, fully guided by Islamic principles,
hasn't really existed in that comprehensive form for centuries, since basically Sharia wasn't the overarching framework.
So the first step is revival.
Exactly, reviving this ummah. And the sources acknowledge that's a huge task, miles away from immediate global leadership, given where the world is.
Yeah.
But it's presented as the indispensable starting point.
So leadership isn't about having the most advanced tech initially.
No, not according to this view. The crucial qualification is the belief system, the COD, and the methodology.
Or framework, basically.
Yes, the framework that can safeguard progress but guide it differently, meeting intrinsic human needs. And this has to be embodied by a real community.
Okay, then there's this concept of ignorance.
Sort of, yeah. But not ignorance of science or tech. It's presented as ignorance about the true foundations of life, of society's systems.
And what defines this T?
It's defined as humans taking over God's role, the right to legislate values and laws independently without divine guidance.
Which the sources argue leads to problems.
Yes, degradation, oppression in collective systems, injustice under capital and colonialism in others. Basically, humans worshiping or being subjugated by other humans or systems.
And Islam's unique angle here is
Freedom from all that, through exclusive worship and obedience to God alone. It's presented as a totally new basis for society, distinct from Western thought.
a fundamentally different starting point.
Right. And this new idea needs that living community, revived through a process they call which eventually leads to leadership.
And it won't happen automatically. There's mention of a vanguard, a.
Yes, a pioneering group is needed, committed to this revival, navigating a world largely operating on those other DC principles.
And they need clear guidance.
Absolutely. Clear landmarks drawn from the Quran and the example of the earliest Muslims to understand their role, their goals, how to interact with the world around them.
Okay, so wrapping this up. The core argument we've explored from these sources is a profound crisis in global values.
Correct. And Islam, embodied in a revived community, is put forward as the potential solution, the path to future leadership.
but not through immediate material power.
No, but through its unique ideological framework, its estothie and akusuk.
Fascinating. So here's something for you to think about. What if the very foundations of global authority are being fundamentally challenged? What would it actually take practically to revive a community on these specific principles today, and what might its real impact look like? Definitely some heavy ideas to consider.